You cannot conquer the world if you have not first conquered what lies within you. Every great change in history began not in speeches or swords, but in the silence of a man's own mind. Before you seek to influence another, you must win the hardest battle you'll ever face, the one against yourself. If you wish to truly influence others, not through tricks or charm, but through quiet power, this message will change how you see yourself. I will show you how every lasting influence begins with inner discipline, with mastering emotion, thought, and purpose before ever speaking a word. Most men seek to be followed. Few seek to be worthy of being followed. By the end of this lesson, you will know how to lead without forcing, speak without shouting, and command respect without asking for it. When I was young, I thought leadership meant having the loudest voice or the strongest will. But I learned, sometimes painfully, that the man who cannot master his anger will soon be ruled by it. We live in a time where everyone wants to be seen, to persuade, to build a following. Yet few stop to ask the question that matters most. Have I earned the right to be heard? That question changed my life, and it will change yours. Because true influence does not begin in public, it begins in private, in the moments no one sees. In the small victories of self-control, that is where the power to move others is born. In this message, I will share the simple but eternal order of influence, the way every great leader, teacher, or reformer has learned to shape others by first shaping themselves. We will uncover what it truly means to master your thoughts, emotions, and habits before you ever speak your truth aloud. I will show you the quiet disciplines that make a man trustworthy and the silent battles that make his words ring true. We'll explore why influence without self-mastery leads to corruption and how the smallest inner victory can ripple into the world around you. Before this hour is through, you will see that the power to guide others begins not with convincing them, but with conquering yourself. Here's something most people completely miss when they talk about leadership. They think influence begins when other people start to listen, but that's not where it begins at all. It begins in silence when no one's watching, no one's clapping, and no one's following. That's the moment a man either builds his strength or loses it. Because before you ever lead a household, a people, or a nation, you must first govern the small republic within yourself. Every man carries a nation inside him. His thoughts are the lawmakers, his emotions the citizens, and his habits the customs they live by. When his reason sleeps, his passions riot. When his conscience grows weak, corruption sets in. And when his discipline falls apart, chaos spreads through that inner land. You can't command others when you can't command that first country, the one that lies inside your own chest. Now, I'm not speaking of cold control. I don't mean strangling every feeling until you become stone. No, I'm speaking of stewardship, the kind of rule that tends the soul as a wise farmer tends his field. He doesn't curse the rain or the wind. He works with them. He channels their power. To master yourself isn't to silence your storms, it's to steer them. When I was a young man, I had a temper that could cut through steel. I remember once, after being insulted in public, I drafted a letter to answer the man who'd wronged me. Every word burned with the fire of my anger. But before I sent it, I read it again. I saw my pride dripping from every line. So, I folded it up, sealed it, and put it in a drawer. That night, I slept on it. By morning, the storm had passed. The letter was never sent. That small act, holding my hand when I wanted to strike, taught me more about influence than any victory ever could. See, the man who rules his emotions rules his destiny. And each time you resist the urge to lash out, you build something unseen, a kind of quiet authority. People may not notice it right away, but they feel it. They sense it in your presence, in your steadiness, in the way your words carry no bitterness, only conviction. Most folks never realize this. Every act of self-control is a vote for order in your inner republic. Every time you lose yourself to anger, envy, or pride, you hand over power to the mob inside you. And believe me, once they take over, they're hard to put down. A leader without self-control is like a captain whose compass trembles at every gust. The ship may still move, but it has no direction. It's the quiet mind that keeps the wheel steady. Influence, real influence, is not about how loud your voice is, it's about how calm your spirit stays when the noise grows loud around you. Now, here's the hard truth. Most people never win that battle. They win arguments, debates, even followers but not themselves. They rise fast, speak boldly, and fall just as quickly, because sooner or later their inner disorder leaks into the world around them. That's why I say, before you seek to move a man's heart, make peace within your own. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you paused before reacting? When was the last time you held your tongue, not because you were afraid to speak, but because you wanted your words to matter? The world's full of noise, but silence carries the weight of thought. That's where power begins. So when you feel anger boil, or envy stir, or pride whisper in your ear, don't see it as failure. See it as the Senate inside your soul calling for order. Sit them down. Listen. Bring reason to the table. That's self-government. That's mastery. And remember, every moment you govern yourself rightly, you prepare to govern others wisely. For a man cannot give peace to the world if he has none within himself. But what happens once a man has quieted that storm? Once his heart obeys his conscience, and his mind listens to truth over noise, what then? Well, that's when he must learn the next lesson. Not to speak louder, but to listen deeper. What I'm about to share might seem simple at first, yet it is the dividing line between those who speak noise and those who speak truth. You see, most men believe influence begins with words, eloquence, cleverness, persuasion. But I've found it begins with silence. The kind of silence that humbles you, that quiets your own thoughts until you can hear something higher than yourself. A man who has not learned to listen to truth, to conscience, to that still small voice that speaks when the world is done shouting, can never truly lead anyone, for he himself is deaf to wisdom. I learned this long before the presidency, long before the weight of a nation rested on my shoulders. When I was a young lawyer, I would sit by the light of a single candle reading law books and scripture alike, not just to fill my mind, but to listen. The pages did not merely speak, they questioned me. They asked, "Are you living this? Are you practicing what you are learning?" I'd stop mid-sentence, look up into the dark, and think. It was in those quiet hours that I realized something most never do. A man's influence is only as deep as his capacity to reflect. For when reflection dies, reaction takes its place. We live in a world that rewards reaction. Men rush to speak, to post, to declare, to shout opinions before they've ever wrestled with them in private. But wisdom does not rush. It waits. It listens. It shapes itself in the dark before it dares to show its face in the light. I have seen more trouble come from a careless word than from 1,000 swords. For words, once spoken, can never be recalled. And those who speak before they think are like a blacksmith who strikes before the iron glows. No matter how strong his arm, the work will never hold. There's a lesson in that old forge. The waiting is what gives the strike its power. The same is true for influence. Before you try to shape another person's thought, you must wait until your own heart is steady and your mind clear. Most men never do this. They speak from haste, from pride, from the need to be right rather than the desire to be true. But those who wait, those who let silence temper their speech, carry a weight that words alone could never achieve. When I would meet with men divided by anger, I'd listen longer than they expected. I'd let them finish, even when I disagreed. And often, by the time they'd spoken all they could, they'd already begun to hear their own folly. That's the quiet power of listening. It disarms without striking. It teaches without preaching. It wins the heart before it ever challenges the mind. You see, the one who listens holds the real authority, for he understands not just what others say, but what they mean. And when he finally does speak, every word lands like an arrow, true and unhurried. Silence is not weakness. It is preparation. It is the gathering of strength before expression. A tree grows in silence before it breaks the soil. The sun rises without announcement before it warms the world. The man who listens, truly listens, becomes like that. His influence doesn't shout. It radiates, and people trust him, though they can't quite explain why. They sense something different in his voice, not volume, but depth, not haste, but conviction. I often think the greatest leaders in history were not those who spoke the most, but those who paused the longest before speaking. The pause, the quiet, that's where understanding is born. I've been asked many times, how do you always seem calm when others rage? My answer is simple, because I listen longer. I listen until the noise burns itself out. I listen until truth has room to speak. Now, perhaps you're wondering, what does this mean for you? It means that before you try to influence anyone, take time to listen to yourself, to others, to life itself. Let silence question you. Let reflection shape you. It's not enough to fill the air with words. You must fill your heart with wisdom, for only then will your voice carry the quiet strength that moves men without pushing them. And when a man has learned to listen, when he can hear the whisper of conscience above the shouting of ego, then, and only then, has he earned the right to speak. But how shall he speak, so that men not only hear, but follow? That's the next truth we must unfold together. Here's a truth that time has proven to me again and again. Words carry the weight of the man who speaks them. They borrow their strength from the character behind them. You can memorize fine speeches. You can polish every phrase until it shines like silver. But if your heart is not clean, your words will not stand. They may impress the ear for a moment, but they will not reach the soul. The world listens, yes, but it listens for something deeper than sound. It listens for sincerity, for integrity, for the quiet harmony between what a man says and what he lives. That harmony, once broken, cannot be faked, and once earned, it cannot be taken away. When I first entered public life, I thought words alone could move mountains. I believed if I could just arrange them rightly, make them clear and clever and full of fire, I could sway the hearts of men. But I learned that eloquence without honesty is like thunder without rain. It makes a great noise but feeds nothing. Influence gained by deception dies with the dawn, while influence born of truth grows stronger with time. I have seen men talk their way into high places only to find the floor beneath them hollow, because they built their fame upon falsehood. And I have seen others, plain of speech and gentle in manner, move nations because their words came from a nation soul that had already been tested and found true. When I spoke the words, "A house divided against itself cannot stand," I did not say them to sound bold or clever. I said them because I felt them burning inside me like a truth too large to contain. I knew the nation might not wish to hear it. I knew it might cost me friends and favor. But I had learned that a man who bends his tongue to please the crowd soon breaks his spirit to serve it. I could not do that. The purpose of speaking, I came to see, is not to be admired, but to be clear, to be faithful to what conscience demands, even if it costs applause. So, before you open your mouth to influence another, ask yourself this simple question: do my actions already speak the words I'm about to say? If not, then no phrase, no performance, no polished tone will make them ring true. Words only have power when the life behind them agrees. You can't preach patience and live in anger. You can't call for truth while hiding deceit. Sooner or later, the world will see the split, and when it does, it stops listening. Because influence without integrity is just noise, and noise never built anything worth keeping. Now, I don't say this to scold, but to warn you. Every word you speak is a seed. Some fall on stone, some on soil, some in the hearts of men who will remember them long after you're gone. So you must tend your words carefully, not by trimming them to please, but by rooting them in truth. Let your life be the soil from which your speech grows, and you'll never have to fear contradiction. If your actions carry your meaning, your words will only be confirmation. If your deeds reflect your message will live even after your voice is silent. I once knew a man, a carpenter by trade, who could not read nor write, yet his work spoke louder than any sermon. Every table, every chair, every beam he laid was level and true, because he refused to measure by anything crooked. He'd say, "If your measure's bent, your work will always follow it." I've thought often about that lesson, for if a carpenter must guard his measure to keep his craft honest, how much more must a man guard his conscience to keep his words upright? One crooked choice, one hidden falsehood, can warp a whole life's work. So when you speak, let your heart be your measure. Let your word weigh more than your wish. Say less, mean more. And remember, truth has its own music. It doesn't need shouting. It doesn't need dressing. When truth is spoken plainly, with a clean spirit behind it, it cuts deeper than the sharpest rhetoric. That is how words gain weight, not through cleverness, but through the burden of character they carry. But words alone do not lead, they must be carried by example. The world does not follow what it hears, it follows what it sees. So if your speech is noble but your living is not, your influence will fade like smoke in the wind. Yet if your life becomes the living proof of your words, you'll find that even in silence, your influence remains. And that brings us to the truest form of influence, the life itself. There comes a time in a man's life when he must learn that words, though mighty, are not the highest form of persuasion. There is a power greater than rhetoric, stronger than logic, deeper than reason. It is the quiet sermon of a life well lived. A man may speak wisdom, but if his deeds deny it, the world will forget his counsel. Yet if he lives that wisdom, if he embodies the truth he claims to believe, his very presence will teach where his voice cannot reach. The greatest influence is not heard, it is witnessed, and the rarest kind of leader is the one who convinces others without a single speech, for his life itself has become the argument. I remember walking miles as a young man just to return a few pennies that weren't mine. It was a small thing, hardly worth the effort, and yet it followed me the rest of my life. People later told stories of it, calling me Honest Abe, as if it were some grand moral triumph. But the truth is simpler. I didn't do it for a name or reputation. I did it because I couldn't bear to build my life on even the smallest lie. I've learned since then that a man's influence begins at the moment he refuses to betray his own conscience, even in the tiniest matters. It's in those quiet, unseen decisions that character is forged, and once forged, it glows in everything you do. People trust what they can see. They might not understand your ideas or agree with your opinions, but they can recognize sincerity when they see it. They can tell when your face and your words belong to the same man. The world is full of talkers, people who proclaim values they've never practiced, who make promises they never intend to keep. But the moment a man does what he says, and keeps doing it when no one is looking, he sets himself apart. That's when his life begins to speak louder than his tongue ever could. I've often said that the soul of leadership is not authority, it's example. You don't need a title to lead, you only need integrity in motion. Titles fade, power shifts, applause dies down, but example endures. Think of a tree. It never says a word, yet every traveler seeks its shade. It doesn't argue or boast. It simply stands where it was planted, steady through every storm, its roots deep, its branches wide, its presence offering rest to those weary of the road. That's the nature of true influence. It doesn't demand attention, it draws it by the strength of its being. Now, I want you to consider this carefully. Every action you take plants belief in another's mind. Each time you choose honesty over convenience, patience over anger, humility over pride, you shape what others believe is possible in themselves. They might not thank you for it. They might not even notice, but they will remember. People rarely recall every word you spoke to them, but they never forget how your example made them feel, whether it lifted them or made them small. That's why self-mastery matters so deeply. When you live rightly, you give others permission to do the same. You become a mirror, reflecting not your own glory, but the best part of those around you. But let me tell you the hard truth of it. Being an example will cost you something. It's easier to talk about virtue than to live it. It's easier to be admired than to be consistent. Living with integrity means walking away from easy victories, refusing shortcuts, standing alone when compromise would be more comfortable. There will be moments when silence feels safer than honesty, when blending in feels wiser than standing firm. But remember this, each time you choose what's right over what's easy, you build influence that can't be stolen, bought, or fabricated. Influence that will outlive you. I've stood in rooms where the air was thick with doubt, where anger filled the walls and division tore men apart. In those moments, I found that calmness was contagious. If I remained steady, others would steady themselves. That is the strange and quiet truth of example. It multiplies. The peace within you becomes peace around you. Your discipline becomes someone else's strength. Your patience becomes another man's hope. That's why I've said again and again that the first republic you must govern is the one within yourself. Because when you do, your life becomes a light, not a flare that blinds, but a steady lantern that others can walk by. So live as if someone is always watching, because someone always is not an audience, not a critic, but a soul who's still learning how to walk upright. Let your consistency be their compass. Let your small, quiet choices be their map. And know this, every honest act, every humble gesture, every selfless deed sends a ripple through the world that you may never see, but it moves nonetheless. Yet even the finest example can falter when tested. It's one thing to stand tall when the sun is shining and your path is clear. It's another to remain upright when the storm breaks, when the world shakes beneath you, when your convictions are put to trial. That's when the true strength of mastery reveals itself not in calm seas, but in the roaring tempest. And that, my friend, is what we must face next, the trial of mastery itself, the calm that must be kept when all else falls apart. There comes a time in a man's life when he must learn that words, though mighty, are not the highest form of persuasion. There is a power greater than rhetoric, stronger than logic, deeper than reason. It is the quiet sermon of a life well lived. A man may speak wisdom, but if his deeds deny it, the world will forget his counsel. Yet if he lives that wisdom, if he embodies the truth he claims to believe, his very presence will teach where his voice cannot reach. The greatest influence is not heard, it is witnessed. And the rarest kind of leader is the one who convinces others without a single speech, for his life itself has become the argument. I remember walking miles as a young man just to return a few pennies that weren't mine. It was a small thing, hardly worth the effort, and yet it followed me the rest of my life. People later told stories of it, calling me Honest Abe, as if it were some grand moral triumph. But the truth is simpler. I didn't do it for a name or reputation. I did it because I couldn't bear to build my life on even the smallest lie. I've learned since then that a man's influence begins at the moment he refuses to betray his own conscience, even in the tiniest matters. It's in those quiet, unseen decisions that character is forged, and once forged, it glows in everything you do. People trust what they can see. They might not understand your ideas or agree with your opinions, but they can recognize sincerity when they see it. They can tell when your face and your words belong to the same man. The world is full of talkers, people who proclaim values they've never practiced, who make promises they never intend to keep. But the moment a man does what he says, and keeps doing it when no one is looking, he sets himself apart. That's when his life begins to speak louder than his tongue ever could. I've often said that the soul of leadership is not authority, it's example. You don't need a title to lead. You only need integrity in motion. Titles fade, power shifts, applause dies down, but example endures. Think of a tree. It never says a word, yet every traveler seeks its shade. It doesn't argue or boast. It simply stands where it was planted, steady through every storm, its roots deep, its branches wide, its presence offering rest to those weary of the road. That's the nature of true influence. It doesn't demand attention. It draws it by the strength of its being. Now, I want you to consider this carefully. Every action you take plants belief in another's mind. Each time you choose honesty over convenience, patience over anger, humility over pride, you shape what others believe is possible in themselves. They might not thank you for it. They might not even notice, but they will remember. People rarely recall every word you spoke to them, but they never forget how your example made them feel, whether it lifted them or made them small. That's why self-mastery matters so deeply. When you live rightly, you give others permission to do the same. You become a mirror reflecting not your own glory, but the best part of those around you. But let me tell you the hard truth of it. Being an example will cost you something. It's easier to talk about virtue than to live it. It's easier to be admired than to be consistent. Living with integrity means walking away from easy victories, refusing shortcuts, standing alone when compromise would be more comfortable. There will be moments when silence feels safer than honesty, when blending in feels wiser than standing firm. But remember this, each time you choose what's right over what's easy, you build influence that can't be stolen, bought, or fabricated. Influence that will outlive you. I've stood in rooms where the air was thick with doubt, where anger filled the walls and division tore men apart. In those moments, I found that calmness was contagious. If I remained steady, others would steady themselves. That is the strange and quiet truth of example. It multiplies. The peace within you becomes peace around you. Your discipline becomes someone else's strength. Your patience becomes another man's hope. That's why I've said again and again that the first republic you must govern is the one within yourself. Because when you do, your life becomes a light, not a flare that blinds, but a steady lantern that others can walk by. So live as if someone is always watching, because someone always is not an audience, not a critic, but a soul who's still learning how to walk upright. Let your consistency be their compass. Let your small, quiet choices be their map. And know this: every honest act, every humble gesture, every selfless deed sends a ripple through the world that you may never see, but it moves nonetheless. Yet even the finest example can falter when tested. It's one thing to stand tall when the sun is shining and your path is clear. It's another to remain upright when the storm breaks, when the world shakes beneath you, when your convictions are put to trial. That's when the true strength of mastery reveals itself, not in calm seas, but in the roaring tempest. And that, my friend, is what we must face next, the trial of mastery itself, the calm that must be kept when all else falls apart. It's a strange thing, how a man discovers what truly governs him. It doesn't happen in the comfort of an easy day or the quiet of peaceful times. It happens when life shakes him, when pressure squeezes him, when everything he thought was certain begins to crumble beneath his feet. That's when a man meets himself. In those moments when anger stirs, when fear rises, when pride demands to be heard, you find out whether you are the master of yourself or merely the servant of your emotions. And make no mistake, chaos is a teacher. It strips away every illusion of control and shows you the truth of your own strength or your weakness. During the war, I learned more about calmness than in all my years before it. The country was breaking, brothers turning against brothers, and I often sat alone through long nights wondering if the Union would survive. I'd receive letters by the dozens, each filled with outrage, accusation, and demand. Generals quarreled, advisors argued, and the weight of it all pressed down on me until I thought it might crush the life out of me. Yet I knew that if I faltered, even for a moment, if I let the storm within me rise to match the storm around me, the whole nation might come apart at the seams. So I learned to be still. I learned to let the noise rage outside me without allowing it to enter. I learned that a man's greatest authority comes not from his position, but from his composure. The truth is, calmness is not born of ignorance. It's not the peace of a fool who doesn't see the danger. It's the peace of one who sees clearly, feels deeply, and yet chooses restraint. There were times when I wanted to shout, to strike, to surrender to despair. But I found that the more the world trembled, the more still I needed to become. Because panic spreads like fire, but so does steadiness. If one man can remain calm, he can quiet a crowd. If one heart refuses to be shaken, others begin to take courage from its stillness. That is influence in its purest form, not commanding, not demanding, but radiating strength that others lean on. You can test this truth in your own life. When tempers flare around you, when conflict erupts in your home, your work, your community, notice how the loudest voice rarely brings peace. It's the one who speaks last, the one who listens longest, the one who carries quiet certainty, who changes the temperature of the room. Calmness commands respect because it cannot be forced. You can't fake it. It's the fruit of mastery, and people sense it even when they can't name it. They know when they're standing in the presence of someone who has won his inner battles. I often think of the river near my boyhood home. In the shallows, the water was noisy, always splashing and stumbling over stones. But in the depths, it moved smooth and silent, carrying tremendous power beneath the surface. That's what real mastery looks like. The deeper the man, the quieter he becomes. Shallow souls make the most noise. Steady souls make the most difference. The man who has mastered himself doesn't need to prove it. His calmness speaks for him. You'll find that people trust a calm man, even if they don't agree with him. They'll follow him, even if they can't explain why. Because in a world ruled by noise, steadiness is rare, and rare things draw attention. When you stay composed in crisis, you become a mirror for others. They see in you the peace they wish they had, and it calls something out of them. It shows them what's possible. It tells them, without a single word, that strength doesn't have to shout to be strong. But let's not pretend calmness is easy. It's forged in the heat of trial. You can't learn it by reading about it or wishing for it. You learn it by being pressed, by being misunderstood, by being tested when you least expect it. Every hardship, every disappointment, every delay, it's all training for the soul. Each test is a question whispered by life itself. Can you stay steady now? Can you keep faith when nothing makes sense? Can you remain kind when the world is cruel? And each time you answer yes, not with your mouth, but with your presence, you build the kind of authority that no title or applause can give. I won't tell you to love your trials, but I will tell you to respect them. They are the crucibles that refine character, the storms that reveal the strength of your roots. Without them, you would never know what peace really means. Anyone can be calm when life is kind, but mastery is proven when life is not. So when chaos comes, and it surely will, don't ask to be spared from it. Ask to be strengthened through it. Let adversity teach you the lesson comfort never could, that the man who stands calm in the storm becomes the pillar others cling to. When you master yourself under pressure, your influence no longer depends on what you say or even what you do. It flows naturally from who you are. And when a man has conquered himself, when he has learned to listen, to speak with integrity, to live as example, and to stand calm amid the world's confusion, there remains one last test. For mastery, if it ends with self, is only half a victory. Its true purpose lies beyond you. The final question is not, can I control myself? But can I use this control for the good of others? And that is the highest calling of all the service of influence, power used not to rule, but to uplift. When a man has mastered himself, when he has ruled his passions, tempered his speech, lived his values, and stood calm in the face of turmoil, he stands on the edge of a new and far greater test. What to do with the power that mastery gives him? Because make no mistake, self-mastery is power. It draws people, it steadies them, it shapes them, but that power is never meant for possession, it is meant for service. The danger of influence lies not in gaining it, but in what we do once we have it. Many rise to strength only to become enslaved by it. They mistake authority for ownership, forgetting that every man who leads is first a servant to something greater than himself. To rule yourself is noble, to use that rule for others' good is divine. I've seen what happens when a man forgets this. History is full of those who mastered their craft, their wealth, their following, but not their purpose. They believed influence existed to lift them higher, not to lift others up, and in the end, their power turned hollow, their names grew bitter, their empires fell to dust. For power without humility is like a fire with no hearth, it burns everything it touches, even the one who kindled it. But power used rightly, tempered by self-control, guided by conscience, becomes warmth, light, life itself. That is the purpose of mastering the self, to make your influence safe, to make your strength a blessing, not a threat. I learned this lesson not in triumph but in heartbreak. During the war, I held the lives of men in my hands. Their fate depended on my pen, my judgment, my restraint. I could sign their pardon or their death. I could grant mercy or command punishment. And in those moments, I often felt that mastery meant not commanding others, but commanding my own pride. Mercy was the harder road, yet it was the higher one. I remember one soldier, barely more than a boy, who had deserted out of fear. The generals wanted him executed to set an example. But, as I read his letter home to his mother, I saw my own reflection in his trembling words. I thought of my own sons, and the thought pierced me. If this were my boy, would I not beg for mercy too? So, I signed the pardon, and when word spread, some called it weakness, but I knew it was strength. Because leadership without compassion is tyranny, and influence without empathy is nothing but vanity dressed in power's clothing. To use your power rightly, you must remember who gave it to you. Every ounce of influence you possess was entrusted to you by the trust of others, by their belief, their hope, their willingness to listen. You do not own it. You borrow it for a time, and you are accountable for how you use it. Do you use it to elevate others or to remind them of your height? Do you use it to protect the weak or to prove that you are strong? These questions must haunt every man who wishes to lead, for the moment you forget them, you begin to lose yourself. You'll find that true influence, in its purest form, does not seek applause. It seeks impact. The mastered self is not chasing followers, it is creating them. not in the sense of worshippers, but of men and women who grow through your example until they no longer need your guidance. That is the mark of righteous power. It multiplies strength instead of hoarding it. A candle that lights another does not lose its flame. Influence works the same way. The more you give, the brighter it burns. Power handled in humility becomes service, and service is the truest measure of mastery. I've said before that I have been driven to my knees many times by the overwhelming conviction that I had nowhere else to go, and I mean that still. For in leadership, there comes a moment when you realize you are not enough, not strong enough, not wise enough, not unshakable enough, and in that moment, if you have mastered yourself rightly, you will kneel, not in defeat, but in surrender to a power greater than your own. The man who can bend his knee before God can stand upright before any man. That kind of humility transforms influence from something fragile and fleeting into something eternal. So, if you would lead, do so not by command but by care. Let your authority be gentleness, your strength be patience, your greatness be in how you treat the smallest among you. For in the end, no one remembers the man who ruled through fear. They remember the one who ruled himself and served others. The monuments built to power crumble, but the legacy of service endures. Every life you touch with kindness becomes a monument to the better part of your nature. And so, if influence begins with mastering the self, if it grows through discipline, integrity, and calm, it must end in love. Not sentimental love, but the steadfast love that guides, uplifts, and sacrifices. Influence that does not serve becomes manipulation, but influence that serves becomes leadership in its highest form. So ask yourself, now that you've learned to rule your own heart, what will you do with that rule? How will you use your strength, your words, your example? For the world is full of those who want to lead, but starving for those who lead through service.